papers they were signing said, we'll never fight again. Join me on the chorus. Last night I had the strangest dream I've ever dreamed before. I dreamed the world had all agreed to put an end to war. And when the papers all were signed and 1,000,000 copies made, we all joined hands and bowed our heads, and grateful prayers were prayed. And the people in the streets below were dancing round and round, and guns and swords and uniforms lie scattered on the ground. Last night I had the strangest dream I've ever dreamed before. I dreamed the world had all agreed to put an end to war. Last night I had the strangest dream I've ever dreamed before. I dreamed the world had all agreed to put an end to war.
It's only appropriate that we thank those who brought us together tonight. And that's the Milwaukee End of the Wars Committee. We want to thank them for organizing this event. Members of that committee, please raise your hand. Thank you. Our first speaker tonight is Julie Enslow. Who's that? Julie Enslow is a founding member of Peace Action Wisconsin and contributing writer to the newsletter. And really importantly for this event, she was the lead organizer against war in Afghanistan after 9/11. Julie.
Well, 4 days actually after 9/11, on September 15th, 2001, Peace Action led a demonstration on water in Wisconsin opposing any war in response to the 9/11 attacks, and especially opposing a war on Afghanistan, which was already being talked about out of the administration. And we called for our government to treat 9/11 as a crime, not as an act of war. We said war was not the answer. So we were fed the big lie about war in Afghanistan from day one, from 9/11 on. Yeah. And 9/11 was actually planned and trained for in Pakistan. The pilots were trained in the United States. Al-Qaeda is based in Pakistan. Osama bin Laden lived in Pakistan. The money came from Saudi Arabia, and the hijackers were basically all Saudis and Egyptians. Not a single hijacker was an Afghan. And yet, our response was revenge, let's bomb Afghanistan. Right? So it was, we didn't want to attack Pakistan or Saudi Arabia, which maybe made some sense in their, if they were thinking in those terms. But no, they were our buddies. They were our allies. Only one member of Congress, and that was Barbara Lee from California, God bless her. She's the only one that had the brains and the courage to vote against a war on Afghanistan. We still honor her for that vote. On October 7th, the U.S. bombed, and sent cruise missiles into Afghanistan and began the war. They toppled the Taliban government, and that was the beginning of the longest war in our history. And today, we are back where we started. Or it gets worse, because 174,000 people have died just in Afghanistan alone, not to mention those in Pakistan. And we have created a humanitarian disaster. This war was not a failure, though, for the top 5 defense contractors and their shareholders. We have Boeing, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and General Dynamics. The war was a cash cow for military contractors. They made huge profits from this war and the suffering of its victims. If you had invested $10,000 in the stock market of any of those companies at that time, it would now be worth $97,000. It was a good investment. It was a disaster for the people who suffered. This war has cost us $2.26 trillion. The war also led to the privatization of the military and the privatization of war. So many paid contractors were involved, at times they outnumbered the soldiers on the ground, and the war spilled over into Pakistan. Roughly 80 times the number that were killed on 9/11 were killed in those two countries. Is that enough revenge? Every Saturday, Peace Action is out there on the corners asking for an end to war. We are still speaking for an end to all the conflicts, and that war is not the answer. We oppose the folly of war, the futility of war, and we stand here together today, 20 years later, to say war is not the answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie and Jill. Now, Julie said that over this close to 20 years, that we have spent $226 trillion. That's out of our tax money. $226 trillion. That's almost twice that of the infrastructure bill that the Senate passed last week. Think about that. Our next speaker is Art Heitzer of the steering committee of the Milwaukee National Lawyers Guild and founder of the Wisconsin Coalition to Normalize Relationships with Cuba. Art Heitzer.
Thank you very much, George. Thank you all for showing up. So the old adage that the first casualty of war is the truth certainly applies to the Afghan situation. So America's longest war of 20 years is really a war of military involvement in Afghanistan of 42 years. So here's just a little bit of background about how we were lied to, leading to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people before what you just heard about from Julie. Jimmy Carter's National Security Advisor, Secretary Brzezinski, and the head of the CIA, Robert Gates, proudly admitted that they lied to us and the world by claiming that we were not supporting the jihadists, the Islamic fundamentalists in Afghanistan who were fighting to overthrow the Afghan government, which had initiated land reform involving women significantly in the labor force and in the schools. But in fact, was actually admitted that before the Soviet intervention, and that, in fact, he wrote a memo that day, which was July of 1979, and said that he believed that this measure, this intervention by the CIA, would be expected to, quote, induce the Soviet Union to intervene directly with its forces. And that began a 10-year war of many Soviet troops, Air Force, etc., Afghan government fighting the jihadists, in which, as I said, hundreds of thousands of people apparently were killed. You have to keep in mind that Afghanistan had a border with the Soviet Union directly over almost 1,500 miles, and this also involved intervention inside the Soviet Union as well. So I will give to you, because I got some extra hard copies, Brzezinski gave an interview to a French newspaper in 1998, and he was asked, the first question is, the former director of the CIA stated in his memoirs that American intelligence services began to aid the Mujahideen in Afghanistan 6 months before the Soviet intervention. Is this correct? Brzezinski: yes, according to the official version of history, CIA aid to the Mujahideen began during 1980, that is to say, after the Soviet army invaded. But the reality, closely guarded until now, is completely otherwise. Again, this is all a quote from Brzezinski. Indeed, it was July 3, 1979, that President Carter signed the first directive for secret aid to the opponents of the pro-Soviet regime. I wrote a note to the President in which I explained to him that, in my opinion, this aid was going to induce a Soviet military intervention. When the Soviets justified their intervention by asserting that they intended to fight against secret U.S. involvement in Afghanistan, no one believed them. However, there was an element, I've got 30 seconds here, folks. I'm in overtime. However, there was an element of truth in this. Don't you regret any of this today? Brzezinski: regret what? That secret operation was an excellent idea. It had the effect of drawing the Russians into the Afghan trap, and you want me to regret it? The day the Soviets officially crossed the border, I wrote to President Carter essentially, quote, "We now have the opportunity of giving to the USSR its Vietnam War." Okay, so this is a classic example of how when we're lied to and when we are manipulated, that there's massive injury to the people of this country, but even more so of the targeted nation, in this case, Afghanistan. Okay.
Thank you. That was Art Heitzer. Our next speaker is Ann Batiza. She's from the Assange Defense Committee. That's a national committee. We have many humble speakers here, and Ann's one of them. Ann Batiza.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here today. As George said, my name is Ann Batiza. I'm from the National Organizing Committee of Assange Defense. That committee is chaired by Daniel Ellsberg, Noam Chomsky, and Alice Walker, the author of The Color Purple. Why do they care about the publisher Julian Assange? Why should I care about Julian Assange and the whistleblower Daniel Hale? This is what Julian said in 2011. Note the time, 2011. He said, the goal is to use Afghanistan to wash money out of the tax bases of the U.S. and Europe through Afghanistan and back into the hands of a transnational security elite. The goal, Julian said, is an endless war, not a successful war. How different, thank you, how different that is from what the media have told us about Afghanistan ever since. And that is why the war profiteers, the Pentagon, the CIA, and their lackeys, who are politicians from both parties and the media, both sides, want to silence him. That is why they have worked so hard to turn the American people against Julian Assange. It's interesting, Julian was so aware back in 2011 of what many of us are finding out just now. A decade ago, WikiLeaks exposed civilian deaths covered up by kill squads, our kill squads. He found that there was torture and there were murders covered up. Assange revealed that our tax dollars were being paid to the Texas corporation DynCorp to procure boys to dance before Afghan police and then later be auctioned off for sodomy. Similarly, we have learned from whistleblower Daniel Hale that 90% of those killed by our drones over a 5-month period were civilians. Not the targets that we were told, but they were civilians. We've just heard about civilians being killed, and our media are very reluctant to go there. The foundation of democracy is information that allows citizens to know what the government is doing in our names. The ACLU and Amnesty International have said that the case against Julian Assange criminalizes journalism. It criminalizes national security journalism, and this heroic publisher, like Daniel, continues to be locked away. That's why I care about Julian Assange. Educate yourself by going to AssangeDefense.org and call Gwen Moore's office. 202-225-4572. That's 202-225-4572. And tell her we need to speak up for Julian Assange, who told us the truth. We need truth tellers in order to have a democratic process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ann Batista. She mentioned Afghan civilians. 47,245 killed, according to the cost of war project. Even within our withdrawal, this whole sense that we can use drones and minimize the human death, especially on our side. But within our withdrawal, a counter-insurgent attack by us killed another 10 Afghan civilians. Collateral damage, cost of war. Not acceptable. Our next speaker is Mark Foreman, a lifetime member of Veterans for Peace and a Vietnam War veteran. Mark.
And nice, powerful.
Yeah.
Oh, I want to hand this on because we got one.
Good evening,
one guy,
everyone.
and he's here.
Okay. Can I see a show of hands of the veterans that are here tonight? That's really fabulous. Let me ask you this, especially the veterans and everyone else. How many of you have ever heard of Major General Smedley Butler? Raise your hand. Okay, I figured most of you would. But today, when I was asked to speak tonight, right away my mind went to General Smedley Butler. Me being a Vietnam veteran, I was in combat in Vietnam. I saw the total insanity of it all. And I knew that someone is making a lot of money off of war, but I didn't know where at the time, who and where they were. I've got this brief thing I want to read just to remind everybody who General Smedley Butler was. In 1931, he retired from the military after 32 years in the Marines. By then, he was beginning to question U.S. involvement in foreign conflicts. He had come to believe that war, in particular World War I, was really a profitable business for the few and at the expense of thousands of lives. He thought of himself as a cog in the imperialist war machine. In a booklet titled "War is a Racket,"
For anybody who has not gotten that book, you've got to get that book. War is a Racket. Butler wrote during World War I, a mere handful of garnered the profits of the conflict. At least 21,000 new millionaires and billionaires were created in the United States during World War I. How many of these war millionaires shouldered a rifle? The general public shoulders the bill. And what is the bill? Newly placed gravestones, mangled bodies, shattered minds. For a great many years as a soldier, I had a suspicion that war was a racket. Not until I retired to civilian life did I fully realize it. I want to say welcome home to all the veterans out there, and just keep working for peace. This is, oh, and let me remind you that General Butler told the people that war is not going to end until we can take the profit out of it. That's something that I think the peace movement really needs to get behind and figure out how we can affect those who are making unbelievable fortunes off of our tax dollars from war. Thank you.
Mark Foreman. Let's throw a couple more numbers at you.